If you don't know how to write DORA documents, then this video is for you. So I'll show you how to determine the list of documents that you need to write, which areas you have to cover, also how to structure your documents, and also how to adapt them for your specific company needs. And I'll also show you a couple of examples of these documents for this EU cybersecurity regulation. And after you watch this video, you'll have a clear idea on where to start writing your policies, procedures, strategies, plans, and other documents that are required not only for DORA, but also for related Commission delegated regulations or CDRs that specify these regulatory technical standards. And I made this video for CISOs, compliance officers, chief technology officers, consultants, and everyone else who is working in financial entities on compliance with DORA. Let's see first how to define this list of documents that you need. And unfortunately, DORA does not really specify which documents are needed or which are not. And this means that you have to go actually through each and every requirement in DORA, and basically you have to focus on chapters 2, 3, 4, and 5, because other chapters are not really relevant for financial entities that need to comply with DORA. But also you need to go through Commission delegated regulations which define these regulatory technical standards. For example, this CDR 2024-1772 defines the rules on how to classify incidents. 1773 defines the rules on how to handle ICT third-party suppliers, and the biggest one, 1774, defines the technical standards for cybersecurity and business continuity measures. So you have to go through each and every article, and basically you have to make sure that you document each and every requirement in these articles. DORA doesn't say really that you need to document each and every requirement there, but it does require you to document the whole system. So to be on the safe side, it's better to document basically each and every requirement from DORA. Now, of course, the question here is, are you going to write fewer number of, let's say, larger documents or larger number of smaller documents? This is, of course, something that is optional, that you have to consider for your own entity what is the best solution. And in the link below, you'll see an article which lists all the DORA requirements with the suggested documents that you can write to cover these requirements. Now, basically, according to DORA, you'll have to focus on 10 key areas for documentation. The first one will be about governance, so basically the top level cybersecurity and business continuity policies that define how senior management needs to control, how it needs to make sure that this cybersecurity and resilience is in full order. So in other words, this is about governance. Then the second area is around asset management, risk management, and business impact analysis. So this is where you list all of your assets, define which are the most critical. You assess all the risks related to these assets, and also through the business impact analysis you define the recovery time objective, recovery point objective. So this is a kind of, let's say, analysis. And then the third area is really this digital operational resilience strategy, where you summarize all this information and basically define your plan on how you're going to implement all of these cybersecurity and resilience measures. And then the fourth area are, of course, cybersecurity measures themselves, and this is probably going to be the one that will have the most documents, so access control policy, password policy, encryption policy, and so on and so forth. The fifth area will be around business continuity, so here you'll have the crisis management plan, business continuity plan, disaster recovery plan, incident response plan, business continuity testing plan, and so on and so forth. The sixth area will be around how you manage third-party ICT risk, mainly through supplier security policy, but you need to have these ICT service exit strategies and some other documents. The seventh area will be how you handle incidents, so basically incident handling policy, but also how you will learn from incidents that happened in your entity. The eighth area will be around how you manage human resources, starting from how you actually sign security clauses with your employees, how you train them, how you make them aware, how do they learn about their security responsibilities, and so on. Ninth area will be around digital operational resilience testing. So you will have this digital operational resilience testing policy, which will define which methods you will be using. For example, various assessments, but also this threat-led penetration testing. But you will also need this digital operational resilience testing program, where you define what will be the timing and responsibilities for each of these tests. And then finally, you will have one area around where you actually control and manage this whole system that includes internal auditing, doing the reviews, and also doing the corrective actions. Okay, let me now show you how to structure DORA documents. And basically, you have to structure all documents in three parts. So the first part is where you define this first page, where you have a company logo, company name, general information about the document. On the second page, typically you would have change history, where you show all the changes that have happened to the document, also together with these version numbers. Then you would have a table of contents. And then you would start this part with the purpose, scope, and users, and also reference documents. So all of these things are typically structured in the same way for any documents, and you would have these elements, I would say, in each of these documents. Now, the second part basically describes the main rules that are the focus of this particular document. So in this case of access control policy, this is obviously about access control. Now I'll explain more about this second part a little bit later on in the video. Now let me move on to the third part, the last part in the document. So here in the last part, you typically define validity and document management. So when is this document valid from? Who is the owner of the document? So who needs to update it and make sure that it's always relevant? You might also define how you actually measure the effectiveness and adequacy of this document. So set up some kind of KPIs. You might also add appendices if they're relevant for this kind of a document. You might also list all the records that are created as a consequence of these documents, and you also typically define some kind of approval method for this document. So this might be a digital signature or something similar to this. Now, how can you adapt these documents for your financial entity? Of course, as I mentioned, these DORA and these CDRs are pretty prescriptive, so whatever says there, you have to write in your documents. However, they do not prescribe everything, because this wouldn't be possible. So for example, for access control, they do require that you define exactly who is authorizing the access, how this access is opened, how this access is reviewed, and so on. But of course, neither DORA nor CDRs, they do not specify exactly who in your company needs to have the access to what, or who authorizes this access. So it's up to you to define in your financial entity who is, for example, authorizing the access of new employees. So when you want to adapt these documents for your specific organizational needs, you have to do two things. First, you have to see what kind of process already exists in your company. So if you already have a certain manager that assigns access level to new employees, then this is probably the way that you can do it further on without changing this. However, the second thing that you have to take into account are risks. So you have to take into account your risk assessment and see if this already existing process is appropriate for the level of risk that you have for this particular area. So if you have really high risks because of this assigning of the access control, then you might reconsider and actually giving this authority to someone who is perhaps higher in the organization to reduce the level of risk. Okay, let me now show you how you adapt the documents for your specific needs. So for example, in this section 3.5, it defines how you regularly review access rights for your systems. And basically it says for assets where the privileged access rights were allocated, asset owners must review whether the access rights granted are still in line with business and security requirements. So let's say that you don't want asset owners, that you want actually heads of departments to do this. You simply change this, and basically this is it. So DORA does not specify who needs to review these, so you're free to define what is the most appropriate for your company. In the second sentence it says this review must be performed every 6 months, and then you see in the comment here that this CDR 2024-1774 specifies that at least every 6 months for ICT systems supporting critical or important functions, and at least 12 months for other ICT systems. So here you have a direct requirement, so you are not fully free to define anything you want. You actually have to comply with these minimum requirements set here. So let's say that you want to do it, let's say every 3 months for ICT systems supporting critical or important functions, and every 12 months for other ICT systems. Okay, I can of course now delete this. This is how, again, you adapt for your specific circumstances, but of course still aligning with the minimum that was required by DORA. And then once you adapted these documents for your specific financial entity needs, then you have to send these documents for approval. And of course, then these documents need to be distributed to all the employees who need to know about it. Okay, I hope this was helpful, and these documents that I was showing you are from Advisera's DORA documentation toolkits, and you can actually access them by signing up for this DORA documentation toolkit that you will find the link in the description below. So you can open up a free trial, and then you'll be able to download the free demo of these documents. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and you can also subscribe to my channel not to miss any of my new videos, and I publish videos every week. Thanks for watching.